I get a lot of questions about my continental purling method. Now, if you don't know what continental purling is, that just refers to the fact that I hold the yarn in my left hand when I knit and purl, if I'm knitting in the round. If I'm knitting flat back and forth and I'm using long straight needles, I tend to throw, and the decision that I make about whether I'm going to continental knit or English knit has to do with the project and the needles that are appropriate to it and a whole lot of other factors. But in general, I do tend to prefer these days to use the continental method of knitting and purling. So I have done videos in the past that either show me using my purling method, like my German short rows videos. People have commented many times about how they're intrigued by the way that I'm purling. Sometimes they complain they can't quite see what I'm doing. I did a video several years ago that showed how I purled, but it was too fast and people complained, and so then I did another video that did a side-by-side comparison of different purling methods and how they were different from each other, and another one that showed when I used one version versus another. But I'm still getting questions about how I actually do my method of continental purling. And so I am going to provide this video to hopefully make it much clearer, my process for how I purl. One of the things that I should mention about my method of purling is that it might not work for you. A large part of what makes it work for me is how I hold the yarn and how I hold the needles, how I tension the yarn. I originally saw a video that someone had posted on Ravelry, a German knitter posted on Ravelry, a video in German that demonstrated the way most Germans, or at least all the Germans that she knew, how they purl. And they use their right hand thumb to anchor the yarn when they knit. Now, in my mind, I just adapted that method of purling to use my index finger. Since I use my index finger when I knit, I tend to anchor the yarn against the needle as I'm pulling a stitch through. I kind of think of that as a bad habit because I don't think it's necessary, but it's a habit that I have. So it seemed to me to translate to purling in that method because it made my knits and purls nearly identical in how they are worked, and it makes things like working seed stitch or ribbing extremely efficient. It's, in fact, one of my favorite things to do now is rib and work seed stitch because I find it so easy with this method. So here's how I purl. The yarn is in front. I insert my needle through the stitch to purl, and you see how that yarn is kind of lying across, it's kind of crossing the stitch that's on the left needle. I'm going to anchor it with my finger, my right index finger. You can use your thumb, you can use whatever finger you want. The point is to hold it on here. Now the needle tip has to come, the idea is that this yarn has to be wrapped around the needle counterclockwise. So if I anchor it and then I rock my wrists, this tip can swing around to the right hand side of that stitch, and you see how my left hand keeps rocking? Then I can get my right hand needle back through the stitch, because the goal is what you're doing when you're purling is you're inserting this needle in here to grab the yarn to pull it back through. And in order to grab the yarn has to be somehow around this needle. So because there's no hook on this, you're basically having the yarn around the needle so that you can pull that yarn, that loop of yarn, back through the old stitch and then off the needle. So when I hold my hand still and I enter the stitch, my left wrist is rocking a little bit this way so that the yarn is laying on the right hand needle. I'm putting my finger on it to keep it in place. Then see what's happening, that my right hand and my left hand they're rocking so that this tip can come around to the right hand side, and then I can bring it back through this stitch. So I come in here, I get my finger on it, and then I'm rocking back this way. So if I'm doing it quickly, Whoops. Well, that was a sterling endorsement. So that's what it looks like quickly. And again, slowly, my needle comes through. I'm anchoring it. You can see how my wrists are rocking. I'm anchoring it. And then these two hands are coming in the opposite direction, like this, so that I can position this around here. So the movements are far less exaggerated when I'm doing it in real time. Oh, that stitch didn't work either. Then I come to the end. A lot of times for the end one, I do tend to just anchor it like this, and then I turn the work to go to my knitting position. Now if I'm knitting, I knit in very much the same way that I purl. I have a habit of just holding the yarn through against the needle while I pull it through. So my knitting, the needle comes around, but I like to just hold my finger on there to bring it through. And then when I purl, the yarn's coming forward. I anchor it, like I said before. My wrists are rocking. Now if I want to go back to a knit, it's already behind the needle. And then I can do that. When this comes off, I just move this needle forward a little bit. Now the yarn is in front. And I can do my purl stitch. Comes off the needle, and it just naturally goes in back, and I'm ready for a knit. So then when I'm alternating, when I'm purling, knitting, purling, knitting, purling. So the movements are very similar to each other, and that's very easy to transition. I'm not trying to convince anybody that this is the way that they should purl, because I think the best way for you to purl is the way that feels most comfortable for you. But if you are struggling with efficiency, and you really hate purling, or you're just wanting to discover additional ways of doing purling, which is kind of how I started on this path, then just look at it and see if you like it. If you don't like it, it's not for you, that's fine. Doesn't matter to me how people knit or purl, because as long as you get the correct results, that's all that matters. So, hope you like it.